To kick things off, I would love to acknowledge that I am calling in from the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people here in Meanjin, Brisbane. When we have these opportunities to share a little bit about our own story, we always like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the traditional owners, where storytelling has taken place for tens of thousands of years. This artwork that you see in front of you is by Wanyi and Kalkadoon artist Keisha Leon, who many of you may be familiar with from the Mount Isa region. This is, I believe, the third in Flying Arts Listen series, and our focus today is on marketing your creative practice. I understand that the backgrounds of people on the call and joining today are many and varied. So I've tried to focus this presentation on providing you with some tangible frameworks, some tips and tricks that will hopefully let you build out your toolkit and begin to be a little bit more intentional with how you market and communicate yourself and your creative practice. In terms of what to expect today, I have arranged this presentation into three parts. The first is about understanding your audience, and it really is about bringing it back to basics of understanding, well, who are we wanting to communicate with, where does the opportunity sit, and starting there to really focus the efforts that you'll make in a marketing and comms space. We'll then progress into a relatively simple framework for building a communication strategy for your business. As I said, having worn the hat of an independent artist, I wanted to keep it really kind of clear and straightforward in sharing some frameworks and tools that you can drive yourself and that you can implement from today at next to no cost to your business. And then part three, which I think is a really important opportunity to unpack for independent artists and business people, creative professionals, is building your personal brand and how you can start to be more intentional around what your personal brand is, how you define it, and the channels that you can use to really start to make that work for you in a more considered way. So we will dive in. Part one is understanding your audience. And I'm going to start with a very boring term, which sounds very corporate, and I promise you that this is probably the most corporate that this presentation will be. But I wanted to start by talking about stakeholders. And stakeholders really is just a suit and tie way of saying anybody within your orbit that has the potential to be interested in or affected by the activities of your business. It's really important to be considering, the breadth of this stakeholder pool from the outset, so you can start to ascertain who are the ones that are most worthy of your very limited time and resource. Now, when we talk stakeholders, there are four groups that we largely kind of bucket them in terms of an industry standard. And that's because not everyone you communicate with has the same relationship to you or your work. And so understanding, the breadth of stakeholders, people, groups, organizations who can either influence your work, who can support your work, who can be affected by your work, then helps us to prioritize who we need to reach, helps us to consider what matters most to them, and therefore where to focus our marketing effort. So you'll see on the screen here some examples. Working left to right is the kind of most prominent on the left through to the extended network on the right there. So when we refer to primary stakeholders, we are talking about the people who are most directly connected to your business success. So as artists, that may be your audiences, if you do live showings, galleries, performance art, etc. Buyers, critically, are very important stakeholders, those who are wanting to buy your art. Any clients, commissioners, presenters, so those that are really at the nucleus of your business success. Our secondary are the people and orgs who can enable, support, or influence your success. So you can get a sense of kind of moving one ring out. This might be funding bodies for those. I think any independent artist has probably been through the process of applying for grants and funding opportunities. So funding bodies would certainly fall into that secondary stakeholder pool. Venues, galleries. So looking at those who can potentially facilitate greater opportunities or exposure for your art. Agents, sponsors, collaborators would be deemed secondary stakeholders. And then we start to move to those that are a little further removed again in tertiary and extended. The broader industry and professional community around you, so that might be other artists, industry bodies, peers, competitors, suppliers, those who don't necessarily have a direct impact on your business, but who still may have an interest. And then the extended, again, are those who not directly involved, but have the power to amplify your work or your reputation. That might be media, that might be influencers, commentators, broader members of the community, etc. And why it's important for us to consider from the outset who those stakeholders are. Critically, it allows us to focus our effort. So I appreciate that when you are an entrepreneur, a sole business owner, your time is finite. And it's really important that we know who matters the most because it helps us prioritize where to spend our time and energy, as well as budget. Understanding who the end user is makes us aware of how to make the marketing relevant to them. So different audiences care about different things. And then understanding who we're ultimately wanting to reach and in what order allows us to tailor our messaging and our channels accordingly. Knowing your audience allows you to really build those relationships. I know in the work that we do, we are absolutely a relationship business. About 2/3 of our new business inquiries come from our network. We are referred by existing clients or with people who have worked with us in the past. And your career is shaped by more than the people who buy a ticket or purchase your work. So giving consideration to the relationships that you may have with presenters, with funders, with collaborators, with media can help unlock that future opportunity. And ultimately, it's all about growing your reach. So the right stakeholders and nurturing the right stakeholders allows or leads to a greater number of advocates for the work you do. And ultimately, you have people out there celebrating your work and putting in a good word for you. And it's important to be considering who the different stakeholders to your business are, because not all stakeholders are born equal. This is a really simple framework for you to consider how to, I guess, attach a value to your stakeholders. First is to identify, so start with the long laundry list of the people who matter to your practice, your career, or your current project. And I'd really encourage you to go wide with that. Consider the various ways that people interact with your work and start with that laundry list, essentially. Then for each, we want to consider what matters to them. How can they influence, support, or amplify your work? And how do you want them to think about you? What do you want them to know about you? And then we go through the process of prioritizing them. So who is important right now? And that's a really important flag, the right now here, because the importance of your stakeholders will change ultimately based on what you're trying to achieve. So deciding where to focus your time and attention now should be based on what your current goals are. That may be, driving attendance to an exhibition. It may be building your online community. It may be getting in front of, funding bodies, or building your broader kind of profile so that when you apply for funding, that you have a larger kind of groundswell of support behind you. And what we would seek to do there is to assess, to attach essentially a really simple scoring framework to each of those stakeholder groups, which will allow you to then determine where to place your energy and investment. And to do that, we look at two things. We look at, firstly, the impact of an individual or an organisation on the work. How important is this stakeholder to me achieving my goals? And then we look at influence. How much ability does this stakeholder have to influence my opportunities, reach, or reputation? And these things aren't always aligned. A stakeholder who has significant ability to impact your work may not be, or to impact you achieving your goals rather, may not have a lot of influence, and vice versa. So for each of those stakeholders, you really want to consider the impact and influence of each. And we've offered here a simple scoring mechanism, 1, 2, and 3, which is a points-based system for assessing those things. 1 being low from an impact perspective. They might be helpful, but they're not important to your immediate success. Medium, they're important and they could contribute meaningfully. And high, they're critical to achieving your goals or progressing your career. And then we look at the same for influence. Low, individuals or orgs who have a limited ability to affect your success. Medium, they can influence or support the amplification of your work. And then high, they can directly create, shape, or significantly influence opportunities around us. When you then put those scores together for each, you can kind of start to get a feel for who your primary audience is, your secondary audience, your tertiary, and your extended. And if this is a journey that you're kind of just starting out on in terms of being more proactive in your marketing and comms strategy building, we really want to focus our energy on those first two, the primary and secondary stakeholders for you. And that's where you want to invest the most time and energy. With a caveat that you'll see there down the bottom, that stakeholder priorities really do change depending on what your goal is at any given point. Key takeaways as we move through part 1. So know who matters, identify the people, groups, and organisations that can influence, support, or amplify the work. Not all stakeholders are equal. And it's really important that we understand who deserves the greatest share of time and attention. I think especially when you are a solopreneur, you are limited by the amount of time you can give to something. And so we want to make sure that where you're choosing to invest, that has the greatest opportunity for return. You want to start with your goal. So stakeholder priority really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And there's acknowledgement there, and this is why this is a useful exercise to do on the regular or semi-regularly, because someone who's a primary stakeholder today for a specific task or opportunity might be secondary, tertiary, extended tomorrow. We want to understand what matters to them, and then we want to review and reprioritize. So as your goals, projects, and circumstances change, so too do the stakeholders and our relationships with them. Moving on now to how we translate that audience intelligence into a strategy for your business. And one thing that I wanted to kind of clarify at the outset is often marketing and communications are rolled into one. They're kind of largely interchangeable in terms of the two terms. And the two work very closely together. But they do have different jobs to do. And I wanted to clarify this because I think the biggest opportunity for independent artists, and particularly resource poor, is in a communication space is the place that I would recommend that we begin, because it requires much less investment of financial resource, and is therefore the kind of tools and tricks that you can start to implement in your business immediately. Marketing is about connecting the right people with your work. So it considers what you're offering, who it's for, how you reach them. Common objectives you'll see there, it's about reaching new audiences. It's about driving a tangible outcome, whether that's ticket sales or art purchases or bookings, generating inquiries or opportunities, building audience loyalty. Communications, on the other side, is about shaping what people know, think, and feel about you and your work. So it very much sits more in the kind of the personal branding space. It considers the stories and messages you share, and how you build your relationships and reputation over time. Communications is absolutely a much longer term objective. And that's the stuff where, it's less likely to change your communication strategy in terms of that brand storytelling, less likely to change than the marketing tactics that you might implement to achieve a specific goal. So when we talk communications, that's about profile and reputation. It's about key messages, and we'll unpack a little bit more about how to tackle those key messages as we progress through the presentation. It's about telling and owning your own story, engaging with stakeholders, building relationships, and then often in a communication space, that's where we manage issues or challenges. And I think that when you do the groundwork in terms of being really clear on what your business is, what it stands for, your personal brand, your storytelling, it gives you the opportunity to really preempt those issues and challenges and plan for them rather than that being reactive. So a communication strategy, therefore, is quite simply a plan for what you need to communicate, who you need to reach, and the channels in which you will reach them to achieve a specific goal. Put simply, the 4 questions you'll see there down the bottom: what are we trying to achieve? Who do we need to reach? How do we need them? What do we need them to know, think, feel, or do? And how are we going to reach them? And why it's important to give consideration to this from the outset. A communication strategy will help keep you focused. It will keep your effort aligned with what you're actually trying to achieve rather than communicating for the sake of communication. Consistency, it creates a clear and consistent story over time. If you think about some of the greatest, or most visible brands in the world or individuals in the world, we know what they value, we know what they prioritize, and those things largely remain unchanged over time. A comm strategy helps you understand who you need to reach and tailor your messages and approach to what matters to them. And I think this feeds back to what we were saying about audiences. Not only do your various stakeholder audience groups have different things that they care about, but they have different communications preferences and channels that they're using. A comm strategy helps you with efficiency. So it's about helping you prioritize where to spend your limited time, energy, and budget, and focus in on the activities that are likely to make a difference. And it gives you something to measure against. So this is a really critical one, and something that Aruga, my agency, is very much known for is we know on every project from the outset what success looks like. And that's determined by the client, and it looks very different to different people. So being really clear on how you will measure your own success for your communications efforts is really important. And then it also gives you something to reflect back on when you look to repeat or to enact a communication strategy for a future opportunity. In terms of what those key aspects of a strategy typically look like, this is a really simple blueprint. There's 8 key components. The first thing and most important is starting with a very clear objective. So SMART goals, measurable goals that the business aims to achieve through its comms efforts. We then want to move on to target audiences. So being clear on the specific groups of people the business wants to reach and influence. Key messages, our key messages that we want to convey. And you'll see, I'll provide an example shortly, but you'll see that those key messages will change based on who the target audience is. It's not a one size fits all messaging approach. We then consider our comms channels, so the platforms that will be used to deliver. That might be social media, it might be website, it might be your partnerships, the tactics and activities, a timeline. And often you'll find in a communication strategy that there's a phased approach to how a campaign would roll out. And I'll step you through a three-phase approach that is probably more relevant to your work as artists. Budget and allocation of resources necessary to execute the strategy, and then critically, as discussed, that evaluation and metrics, so methods to measure the effectiveness of your communications efforts. There's no point doing something if we can't track the success of it and apply the learnings to inform future activity that we're doing. And that's certainly another I guess, hallmark of the work that Aruga does is our end of campaign reportings. I would say that we are almost as famous for our reporting as we are for the work that we deliver, because it captures in one spot in real time the learnings that can then be applied to future activity, no matter what it is. In terms of how you choose your communications channels, it can be so overwhelming with how many ways there are. And I think there's a pressure that a lot of us feel to be on every channel and to become experts at every channel. And I think, you know, when we've just almost got our handle on, you know, just the breadth of social media channels that are available, we've now got to deal with AI as well and the tools that are available there. And I think that one of the biggest barriers to really starting this comms and marketing journey for yourself is the overwhelm that we often feel with thinking that we need to be capitalizing on all of the available channels. And that's not the case. There are countless ways to reach your audiences, but it doesn't mean you have to use them all. So as part of this kind of building out of a comms plan and really starting with understanding what we're trying to achieve, who we're trying to influence, that then informs the channels that are best suited to communicate with them. So in terms of what those communication channels might look like for your business, so your website, maybe you have a website, which is your digital home. It's the place where you have your official, you know, information about who you are, where people can explore your work, when they can find out how to engage with you. Very interestingly, about 70% of people now use social media as their first point of call in exploring a brand or person or activity. So websites have been superseded in that way. However, websites are largely considered to be the most credible source of information. And people will use it as a quality marker. So they might use social media more for discovery and awareness, but then they'll come back to a website to validate that, you know, you are legitimate and that sort of thing. And you'll start to see down the bottom there when we say, when I say best for, it'll give you a sense of how you can start to use these channels for different purposes depending on what your activity is. Social media, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, all tools that are available to you and will have varying levels of influence depending on what your business is or what you're trying to achieve. Email, this is a really critical one, and email almost feels outdated, you know, when we look at things like social media and AI search. But I cannot stress the importance of owning your own data. You know, we've all seen how the algorithms have changed from a social media perspective, how much they continue to change. You only have to open Instagram these days to know that, only about 1 in 6 posts that you receive is from someone that you actually follow, and the rest is, content you may like or sponsored content. The best way that you can be communicating with your audience in the way that you want to is by creating that open line of dialogue with people who want to hear directly from you. So I'd really encourage you, to be considering what are the simple ways that you can start to build your own database. When you're exhibiting, is it a QR code to sign up to your mailing list? When you send an art, are we encouraging people to join the mailing list, etc.? Really, the owned audience, as we call it, the data that you own and only you own will become one of the most valuable currencies that you have. Search and discovery. So search engines, online listings, they help. That's probably the best from a conversion perspective. So we're able to intercept people who are already searching for things that that you might be offering. Then we move over to a media and PR space. This is a really interesting landscape that we find ourselves in, and particularly with the rise of AI. When Aruga launched our business 9 years ago, we launched as a PR agency, and a PR agency is largely a business that deals with getting their clients in the media. And so we launched as Aruga PR. We even had the PR built into our logo. And then a couple of years in, we dropped that because we were finding that the breadth of work that we were doing was much wider than an earned media space. So, the rise of influencers and the role of content creators, the opportunity that they present, partnerships and activations. So we started to not de-invest in PR, but now of our team of 20, a third of the team are in a PR role. So they work in that media space. And then the rest are a much broader marketing function. What's become really interesting, however, is the way that people are very quickly moving from traditional search engines to AI search engines. And the way that AI is prioritizing brands or floating brands, products, experiences to the top is based on third-party validation. And so, of course, the biggest source of that, and when AI models are pulling, search engines are pulling data, they're looking at the most trusted searches. And lo and behold, it is the established PR channels, media channels, that are the ones that are the most valuable in that space. So as an agency, we've experienced this really interesting shift in that PR has been diminishing in value for our business as an industry based on the changing media landscape. But suddenly we have done a full 180 on that, because brands are recognizing that if they're going to appear in those search, that search and discovery space via these engines, then they need to be talked about by third parties. Paid media, paid advertising across social media, search, and other platforms. As an independent theatre maker, almost all of our budget goes into paid advertising on social media. It is the most effective way to directly see your brand messaging land in the hands of those that you recognize might like it the most. You can turn it on and off in real time. You're not committing budget upfront like you would if you got a billboard or a magazine ad or that sort of thing. So when I am spending my personal money to try and sell tickets to my shows, it's about 95% paid. Facebook and Instagram is where we would direct that spend. Partnerships might be, interesting collaborations, the shared audiences. Who are the like-minded brands or individuals within your network for whom you have a shared audience, and how can you combine resources to the benefit of both parties. And then networking. So sometimes the most powerful connections is a conversation. Many moons ago, an old boss of mine said a phrase that has really governed the way that we do business, and that is that people do business with people they like. And I think networking is such a horrific word. I hate the idea of networking, and but really, it's about having a conversation, spending time with people, getting to know them, getting to understand them, and then building a relationship that may or may not provide opportunity both ways down the track. Um, so you can see there the way that those comms channels are complementary, but have different nuance in terms of who you're trying to reach and for what purpose. A little example here. This is just a hypothetical based on an independent artist. And so I thought it would be great to kind of showcase how that translates into an example that might help some of this theory. Would we call it theory? Maybe not, but help it land a little bit. So this is a hypothetical situation. Maya, an independent visual artist preparing to launch her first solo exhibition at a small Brisbane gallery. The exhibition opens in 8 weeks and runs for 3 weeks. And I've defined Maya's goals are to attract 300 visitors to the exhibition, to sell a number of work, most critically, to build her profile as an artist, and to develop relationships that could lead to future exhibitions and commissions. So they're our kind of goals that we're starting with for this mock brief. We then seek to define the objectives, Maya's objectives. So we want to build awareness of Maya and After Dark, drive attendance and artwork sales, and strengthen her profile and professional network to create future opportunities. We then look at our audiences, and this is where you'll see the introduction of a kind of primary audience and a secondary audience, which again comes down to where we are prioritizing our time and effort. And you can start to see, the different stakeholders that interact with Maya's activity and how they could be beneficial to her business and career. So within the primary audience pool there, we of course have Brisbane arts and culture lovers. We want 300 people to come to this exhibition. So a primary audience for us is people who already seek out exhibitions, galleries, cultural experiences, etc. Also within that primary audience pool are our potential art buyers. So we want to find and get in front of those who we recognise have an interest in purchasing original artwork. And we might recognise that because they follow other artists, they might follow galleries, etc. And then existing supporters. So Maya's existing followers, friends, professional networks, previous buyers would all be considered within that primary audience group. And then our secondary audiences, this is when we get down to kind of 3 and 4, when we talk tertiary and extended stakeholder groups, but gallery owners and curators. So professionals who could potentially provide opportunity for Maya down the track in terms of exhibitions or commissioning opportunities, that sort of thing. Arts media, so journalists and commentators who can build Maya's profile, not necessarily those who are intrinsic to this specific opportunity for Maya, but that who have the opportunity to benefit her longer term. And then arts industry and fellow artists, so peers, arts orgs, other industry connections who can help amplify the work and make introductions. Messaging and channels. So then you'll see here how the nuance that kind of starts to come in. So for audiences, this is an exhibition worth experiencing. For buyers, it's an opportunity to own an original artwork by an emerging artist. For industry, Maya is an artist with a distinctive practice. And then you look at those channels and tactics. So if we know who the audience is, and then what's the best way to connect with them. And you'll see some examples there. I am conscious of time, so I might I'll progress with haste through some of these examples. But you'll see here a 3-phase timeline when we talk about what that might look like. So we start with an awareness phase, 8 to 4 weeks before opening. We then progress within that immediate run into the event, the 4 weeks before opening night, and the way that Maya's tactical activities would change from phase one to phase two. And then the momentum for sustaining momentum once the exhibition's opening, ways that Maya can continue to maximize that opportunity that presents. And then our evaluation network. So how do we know if this works? We define these from the outset, of course. So we're looking at, setting KPIs around exhibition visitors. We wanted 300. How'd we go? Opening night attendance, sales, critically. We might look at the reach and awareness metrics. Did we see a spike in website visitation? Did we grow our social media followers? Audience growth. Did we get some of those prized owned data acquisitions in terms of people signing up to hear more from us? And then any profile or opportunity. So it's always good to kind of group, your measures of success and be really clear on what you're tracking. Start with the goal, put your audience at the center, choose your channels purposefully, plan for the whole journey, and then measure what matters are the key takeaways as part of this section. Part 3 is building your personal brand. And this is one that I kind of came to a little late in the piece, ironically, as somebody who's only ever worked in PR and marketing. But I had a business coach about 5 years ago who said that for a marketer and a publicist, we were probably among the quietest in the country. And she really encouraged us to be more proactive in how we celebrate our successes and our experiences in a little more vocal way. And I think this is a very Australian thing, right? The tall poppy syndrome effect of it all, where we don't often like to be seen to be broadcasting our own wins. And I guess that this section focuses in on a couple of, or a way that you can start to do that, but in a way that might feel a little more natural for you as you get underway. And this is LinkedIn. I think I wanted to hone in on this channel because I expect that there's probably a greater familiarity from the group with channels that are more visually facing in terms of, your Instagram, your Pinterest, places where you can showcase your work. And LinkedIn is a channel that perhaps some of you don't use as effectively as you can. And I wanted to share how easy it can be to do that. Actually, I think it's just tipped 17 million Australians use Instagram. So it's about 70% of the country and 6.5 million active users every month. It's a place for cultivating conversations and building network. It drives awareness and builds that network for you, and ultimately is a key driver in website traffic. I wanted to talk you through some tips and tricks for how you can build that personal brand strategy for yourself. And the most important thing for you to realize is that you already have a personal brand, and that is the reputation you build through your work, through your experience, your expertise, your relationship, and what you choose to share. And when we refer to a personal brand strategy, it's about being intentional about that reputation. And that's a word. Intentional is a word that you would have heard me use a lot throughout the presentation, but it is really clear on committing to what you can do for your business and being really intentional with that. Consistency over time is the important thing. Founder of Amazon, very successful business person, summed this up beautifully when he said, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And so this is about kind of defining what do you want them to say. This is a really fun thing, a scorecard that is available to you right now for those that are on LinkedIn. And what you're seeing in front of me here is what is called a social selling index. And this is my social selling index. And as an overachiever, 61 out of 100 might not look amazing, and especially when somebody has been given a platform to share what they know about marketing. But the average social selling index for a general user on LinkedIn sits between that 40 and 50%. 40 and 50 out of 100. So you'll see there, based on my industry ranking, allegedly this score puts me in the top 1%. Amongst my network, obviously my network's a lot broader than my own industry, puts me in the top 4%. How this is calculated, it gives you a score out of 100 based on 4 areas. So your professional brand, how effectively you present, finding the right people, how you identify and connect with people relevant to your goals, engagement, how much you use the platform to participate in conversations of interest and influence, and then building relationships. So, how effectively you develop and maintain a relevant professional network. So, it's not about follow count, it's not about spamming and building a great sized audience. It's about when LinkedIn understands what you do, are the people that you're connecting with relevant, in terms of a community kind of sense. QR code there, pull out your phones. This will take you to the site. And if you've got a LinkedIn and you're logged into LinkedIn, this will give you that score. And it gives you a benchmark for you to begin to kind of work out how you can begin to strengthen the activity that you're doing on the LinkedIn space. If you don't have your phone on you, if you just search in Google LinkedIn Social Selling Index, it will give you the link to head to that as well. Ways to improve your SSI just here, build your professional brand, find the right people, engage on the platform and build strong relationships. I'll fast forward a little bit here just in the interest of time, but to give you a peek under the hood of how I use LinkedIn from a content strategy perspective for myself and my own personal brand. The algorithm is really important on LinkedIn, and it really uses a complex web of signals to prioritize content that it believes will be relevant, useful, and engaging. And often you'll see this when you're on LinkedIn yourself. You see things that LinkedIn has determined might be of interest to you based on the conversations you're participating with, the information that you're putting out. LinkedIn wants useful content that starts real conversations. So it really prioritizes content that showcases useful knowledge or advice. They want real perspectives and lived experiences. They want vulnerability. They want relevance and meaningful engagement. So really participating. It is amongst the most participatory platforms where you are rewarded for the way in which you engage. I feel like I've covered this, but in terms of how it works, it starts with looking at what your personal content is about. Is it relevant? Is it useful? It then looks for signals that people find your content valuable. So are people commenting, reacting, sharing it, saving it? And then it uses your content to push to other people that are like the people who have been engaging with your content. So the better LinkedIn understands who you are, what you talk about, who finds it valuable, the better it will distribute your content. I'll just skip forward a couple of slides here to my content pillars and why I think it's important for you to define yours. When planning content, it really helps to define a small number of content pillars, so the topics and themes you want to consistently talk about. They help you decide what to post. They keep your content focused, and it ensures that you're building that clear and consistent personal brand, which is something that I touched on earlier around the importance of consistency over time. And so for me, what you'll see on the screen here are the three key topics that form my personal brand strategy from an Aruga perspective. So first and foremost, the work, independent agency life. I like to showcase our high-profile client activities, campaigns, launches, behind-the-scenes moments to really give evidence of the caliber of work we're doing. The network. I'm in a relationship business, and one of the key value adds that we offer as a business is our connectedness to Queensland's business community. And then the arts, my great love, my first love, but demonstrating that my connectedness to the art sector is genuine, long-standing, and personal. And they're the three buckets that define how I present on LinkedIn. And you'll see some examples here. I won't go into them at length, but if you jump on my feed, you can have a look there. But these are examples of the work bucket, showcasing the type of work we do, the scale, the conversations that we're a part of, the client relationships that we hold. So you'll see a variety there from Queensland Hotels Association to Brisbane Economic Development Agency to Royal Caribbean. The network. So this is about kind of my connectedness within the business community of Queensland. On the right there, the events that we partner with, the lessons. So sharing that very kind of tangible advice for other people who might be in a similar space. On the left there, I participated in a panel event at this year's Content Summit. And then the arts. So this is just showcasing that I'm not merely an observer, but an active participant in the landscape via my work with the Little Red Company, via Le Bois Theatre Company, etc. In terms of what that could look like for you from an arts perspective, your buckets might center your practice, the behind the work, the work in progress, your story, your personal story, or your community. So I'd really encourage you after the call to consider what are the three content pillars that would be valuable for you to start to anchor your content and storytelling in. Key takeaways there. So LinkedIn is more than an online resume. It's one of the most powerful platforms for building your personal brand and demonstrating your expertise. It allows you to get your house in order first, or rather, get your house in order first. So make sure that your profile clearly communicates who you are and what you're about. Be intentional about who you connect with and what that network looks like. Define what you want to talk about and then show up and be useful, be an active participant in that channel.